Yeah. And The Witcher does that beautiful.
Oh no, Alyssa, it's happening again. We're so close.
Alyssa, no.
Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international Hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny, Cirilla of Cintra, across the continent. Guys, I can't believe we're already here. It's the end of the line again. We started season 3 of Breakfast in Beauclair back in March, and it's the end of October. How did that happen? I hope that you all have a lovely 3-month break. I know I'm planning on it. I signed up for Spanish classes, which I know that the Spanish speakers in the Discord are very excited about. And I also signed up for a workout challenge at my local gym. So I'm looking forward to having a ton of fun over the podcast break. We're currently in the midst of casting the audio drama that I'm executive producing, which will hopefully come out next year. And oh yeah, The Witcher Season 2 is coming out over the break also. It has been such a joy reading Andrzej Sapkowski's Blood of Elves with you. Thank you so much for being a part of the journey and joining the Hanza as the podcast and our community grow. Thank you so much to all of the guests and partners who made this season possible. Brett, Lindsay, Charlotte, Anita and Carolina, Leah, Maddie, Josh, Eric, Garrison, Daniel, Sarah A, and Alicia. A special thanks, of course, to Lars Flicks for his partnership as our Tidings from Toussaint news correspondent and just for being a great friend. Breakfast in Beauclair will return on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. Join us for Season 4 as we cover Netflix's Nightmare of the Wolf and The Witcher Season 2. In the meantime, I know how I'll be celebrating the end of the season. Our Hanzaween Halloween party and Witcher cosplay contest is this Saturday, October 30th. I've got my costume set. Got yours? Closet cosplay is super easy just because it uses everything that you already have. Meet members of our community and join the party at the Hanza Discord at bit.ly/thehanzadiscord. Apply to be a guest on a future episode of the show at bit.ly/witcherguest and find this year's podcast survey at bit.ly/listenersurvey2021. Take the survey quick. The thank you code for 15% off the Breakfast in Beauclair shop is good for just a few more days. We're still planning a Hanza meetup for 2022. Join the Hanza Discord to join travel planning and coordination over the podcast break. While the podcast is away, you can catch me on a few other shows. I was recently a guest on But Make It Scary, a show where the host Sequoia and I took turns turning a 2004 rom-com into horror films. I had so much fun bringing Norse mythology into a classic. Look for But Make It Scary wherever you get your podcasts. In December, I'll also be a guest on an upcoming episode of Mike Schubert's The Newest Olympian, a podcast that seeks to answer the question, is Percy Jackson the young adult series we should have been reading all along? I loved reading the Percy Jackson Heroes of Olympus series, and if you love The Witcher and Breakfast in Beauclair, you're going to love The Newest Olympian too. Follow Breakfast in Beauclair across social media to be notified about the release. We had one new patron squeak in for the last episode of the season today. Welcome Phoebe from the US to our Hanza on Patreon. As always, thank you to our patrons for making the show possible, and to our produce-level patrons, Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Eric Sgodling, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Charlotte from Bengerberg Glamorai, Red Kite, the Original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, Claire Odell, Gennady Mandilovich, Brett from California, Wolf, Corey from the US, John of Riblia, Sebastian von Novigrad, Tom from Australia, Jill Kate the Tabby Witch, Ollie from Sweden, James Carson III, and Kyle the H2Ho. I'm thrilled to announce that for this year's exclusive producer-level gift, I'm partnering with Amanda from Steeped in Lore to create 3 custom tea blends inspired by Breakfast in Beauclair and holidays on the continent. If you would like to explore becoming a patron of the show and maybe receive next year's producer gift too, head over to patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. As for this episode, Sarah A. from the UK and Alycia from France close out part 2 of our discussion of Blood of Elves, Chapter 7. Join us as we discuss the strength and softness that Yennefer and Ciri bring out in each other, magic as chaos, art and science, prophetic visions, lessons on intimacy and consent, owls, monkeys, and little ugly ones, Polish euphemisms, and, oh yeah, the end of Blood of Elves, and, hey Geralt, remember when you dated that hag Yennefer? In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Lars from Witcher Flicks shares news about The Witcher Season 2, The Witcher Blood Origin, and this year's Luca Comics and Games Festival. Without further ado, let's conclude our discussion of Blood of Elves Chapter 7 and Breakfast in Beauclair Season 3. When we left off, Ciri had flashed back to Yennefer's arrival at the Temple of Melitele and to her most early days with the sorceress. Through the rest of the chapter, we flash back through Ciri's memories of the sorceress. Yennefer puts Ciri through a series of tests and, after confirming her natural magical abilities, trains her. So almost similarly to Ciri's training in GoodMorhen, we get all of these little vignettes about what Ciri and Yennefer have been up to, over the course of a couple months to a year that they're here at the Temple of Melitele. This first section deals with Yennefer having Ciri do a bunch of paper tests in which, Ciri has to figure out the pattern of, there are 3 stars and then 2 stars and then how many stars are next. Draw a house, draw the 5th house, that sort of thing. But there's 2 things notably here that Yennefer requires of Ciri as her apprentice. And the first is obedience, and the second is sincerity. Yennefer says, it's enough for you to disobey or lie to me, and we will cease this immediately. This sincerity and obedience will go 2 ways. And Ciri's just like, can I ask just one question? And Yennefer's like, okay. And Ciri asks, what is there between you and Geralt, Lady Yennefer? The chapter reads, Ciri almost fainted, horrified at her own impertinence, chilled by the silence which followed the question. The enchantress slowly approached her, placed her hands on her shoulders, looked her in the eyes from up close and deeply. Longing, she answered gravely, regret, hope, and fear. And it kind of continues, and Yennefer's like, yep, I think that's everything. Okay, so time for the tests. And it's just this moment of just, I think, breathlessness, even for the reader.
Yeah. It really is, because you've just seen how Geralt is clearly such a point of contention with the battle of wills between Yennefer and Nenneke about it, and then even with Ciri and Yennefer. So the fact that Ciri just immediately is like, what's between you and Geralt, Lady Yennefer? And you're just like, oh my god. Just of all the things to ask, she just flat out, no hesitation, immediately asks it as soon as she can. I love how even herself, she's like, oh fuck, why did I ask that?
I'm gonna get in trouble.
Yeah. But it's so notable that Yennefer takes her seriously and gives her a real response.
Yeah, so that's so important, I think, for the foundation of a relationship. Yennefer was all complete honesty between us, and I think Ciri immediately puts that to the test and asks the most daredevil question she could have asked, And Yennefer delivers. She's all like, okay, I promise, so I will answer you truthfully what I think,
It really is.
I think also Yennefer, Ciri probably heard some mentions of Yennefer when she was at GoodMorhen. I can imagine Lambert being like, hey, remember when you dated that hag Yennefer girl? Or something along those lines. I can definitely imagine that. So, I feel like she's heard that name before and is sort of interested about how they fit with each other.
I feel like Alyssa, the word you use, the breathlessness for everyone, including the audience, is bang on. It's exactly, especially the audience, because we've seen Yennefer and Geralt, we've seen their relationship, we've seen the nice parts and we've seen the ugly parts.
Yeah.
So seeing Ciri just ask it and you're like, oh my god, she just said it. She just asked it immediately.
Yeah.
Breathlessness is like, oh.
She said the quiet part out loud.
Oh my god.
Oh man. And it's, because we know what Yennefer is capable of. And if she wanted, she could smite Ciri off the face of the planet for asking such a question. But as I said, she responds to her with sincerity and honesty, which, as Alycia said, sets that foundation for the relationship. Unfortunately, this also means that Yennefer is sincere in a very different way. in the English translation, she continually refers to Ciri in this chapter as my little ugly one or my ugly one. An interesting note about this, I had heard complaints from Polish readers that, this doesn't sit right with them. There's a few things in the English translation that don't really make sense, according to Polish readers, and this is one of them. When you're reading the books as an English reader, it seems a little cruel. There's not a lot of affection with that. However, so I did tap Cyprian. You might remember Cyprian from, I think, episodes 3 and 4 and 15, if I'm remembering correctly. He did give a little bit more context for the translation here and for another part that we'll get to as well. The word that Yennefer uses in Polish, it is spelled Brzydulka. Brzdulka, maybe? I think I might just end up downloading Polish for Duolingo just to understand how to pronounce things in Polish, but that's the best I can do for now. Cyprian says, I'm afraid there's no exact translation. It comes from Brzdulko, meaning ugly. However, it's a more advanced, quote, belittled form, but simultaneously in a cute way, if that makes any sense at all. It's a diminutive form. For example, in Spanish, you would say, gato for cat and gatito for kitten. It's a very, cute thing. So, yeah, in the original Polish, there's affection to it. And as well in other translations, going online and looking at a couple of forums and looking into it, it sounds like in Italian, they used little monkey instead of my ugly one.
Oh, that's very cute.
That's really cute.
And in German, apparently they use little owl
Aww.
instead of my ugly one. But Alycia, you have a little note about what they say in French.
It's not on the cute side of the nicknames. I had to check because I genuinely could not remember what they said in French. I think my brain just sort of erased it. She calls her laidron, which is not a nice word. I just typed into Google Translate to see what comes up in English. It just comes out with ugly, but it's sort of an old word as well, which I guess makes sense in the setting, because the translation that what I would give for ugly would be moche, but that sounds too recent of a word. Yeah. Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Okay. And laidron is really not something that you would use any other way than sort of ironically, being high up on your horse and being oh, tu es un tel laidron, being ooh, you know what I mean? So it gives out this really weird vibe of don't call a kid like that.
Oh my god.
No, it's not cute.
I'm not Polish at all. I don't really speak any other languages. I used to be able to. I've forgotten them all because of medicine. I was aware of the ugly one thing being kind of different. And it really frustrates me, especially it frustrates me even more now knowing that you've said that in other languages, they have other versions that are a lot nicer,
yeah.
Little Monkey.
Yeah, and apparently, there are some words that can't be translated. And apparently, that one Polish word is not translatable, and it's just very frustrating to not be able to understand what the original meaning of that nickname was.
Yeah, and I wonder how many other instances, because I do not speak Polish, I do not read it, and I cannot understand the original words, how many little nuances that end up getting missed because of the differences in the translation. And I know nothing about translation work here, but sometimes maybe it's better, instead of trying to do as literal translation as you can, like they've clearly done here with my ugly one, to make it a little bit different, but have the meaning or the feeling of it be more correct, like little monkey. You might call a naughty child a cheeky monkey or a little rascal or something. I always thought it was meant to be more along those, you little monkey, or, And I think it's a real shame because this is really used, I've seen a lot, as kind of bad faith criticism towards Yennefer.
Yes.
Where they're oh my god, she's so mean and cruel towards Ciri, she calls her ugly. And it's well, obviously in the English translation, that comes across as very harsh. But in the original, the meaning of it is just different. And just because they haven't maybe used the best way to kind of translate it, it really changes the character interaction. And that's a real shame.
Yeah, I'm trying to even think of well, what would even be a better substitute in English? And again, not a translator. Because there is that little bit of just irony, or that little bit of Yennefer knows that she's making a joke of some sort. At least that's the understanding that I get from what I've heard. Would my little goblin or my little gremlin it'd be a little cuter in English?
Yeah.
But I can almost see something like that where there's still a little bit of It's a little bit biting, a little teasing, but like to say somebody's like a little gremlin kind of gets the point across where there's affection to it, but it's still something that's a little bit gross.
Yeah, like my little monster or something.
I feel like maybe from Yennefer's part, it's actually, quote unquote, a compliment in a sense that Yennefer knows that every single sorceress and like the beauty that Ciri so admires in her, she knows that this is fake. Like it all comes from magic. It's all artificial. Like it's not what she was at first. And I feel like in some way, maybe, again, I'm thinking too much about it, but maybe, in some way she's complimenting the fact that, Ciri is pure and she's herself and she does not need any artifice and she does not need, to sort of like fake a beauty to like get into the world, because I feel like that's how Yennefer feels about it. She had to become beautiful to become someone in the world, in the sense that when she was Hunchback Yennefer, she sort of felt that no one really wanted her. I guess there's this idea also of like, you're ugly, but that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think we definitely see that in later parts of these little vignettes as well. So before they're through with the paper test, apparently the temple novices told Ciri that she can't perform magic. Ciri is just like, all of this is useless. I can't do magic anyway because the girl said I'm a virgin. Yennefer's like, LOLK, so? Yennefer does not care. Yennefer's like, okay, so if it's such a big deal, I'll wait for you to like go lose your virginity and then come back and we'll keep going with the tests. And Ciri's like, no, you don't understand. And Yennefer's like, okay, this is dumb.
I love how Yennefer is like, so you'll be back in like what, 10 minutes? I'll wait, it's fine.
She's like, be quick about it.
I know, and she's so biting because Ciri is just like, I don't understand what all these tests and these pine trees have to do with seeing if I can do magic. Yennefer just goes, what do pine trees have in common with magic? Nothing. But you've drawn it correctly and on time. In truth, excellent for a virgin. And it's just like, so good. So good. We already know that, like, Ciri has been fed all of these things and gossip from the other girls. Yennefer is having none of it. We'll kind of, like, see how that affects their relationship later on, as well as Ciri's fixation about this. She is coming to age. As we learn, she's 13. We are with Ciri as she's kind of fixated and asking questions about sexual relationships throughout the rest of this chapter. And I don't envy Yennefer for having to give her answers.
I mean, it definitely happens a lot with kids. There's this age where they get like very fixated about it, but they still have that child wonder, if I might say it like that. So they basically like, how do you make a baby? And what's a penis? And you're like, well, what happens is that. And I feel like, she's sort of in that moment or in that phase. She wants to know, but at the same time, she feels scared to ask because I feel like she knows that that's not a subject to really talk about. And I mean, especially, I find it interesting because I don't think anyone in Cintra gave her sex ed. She was basically meant to be the wife of some prince or some king and like have his kids, and basically that was it, like that was her destiny. I don't think anyone taught her about consent because at that moment it was not a thing for her. She was gonna have to be with whomever it was, and like suddenly she's asking a lot of questions and she sees that woman who is sexy and has mounds and she's all like, oh my god, maybe she's a source of information.
Yeah.
And she's trying to get all the info that she can.
And there's no way in hell that any of the Witchers gave her any of that information before she left either.
Oh my god.
Oh my god, can you imagine?
Jesus.
There's no way.
Do you remember how they reacted when she got her first period? Do you really think any of them was all like, so
No.
Ciri?
Absolutely not.
Papa Vesemir, how are babies made?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that conversation?
I can imagine Vesemir getting red and being like, no.
Oh my god. I do not have children of my own, but I would imagine that if I did and I had to give this discussion, not similar to the scathing way in which Yennefer gives it, but still like clinical and factual. Like, this is what happens and like it's normal. But for the most part, without all the dressings of Yennefer's snark, I do for the most part respect the way that she gives Ciri information.
To be fair, working where I work, I've had to do sex ed to 13-year-olds, 15-year-olds. That's pretty much my approach to it, Usually it's people that have already had sex and sometimes have had like bad experiences with it or things like that.
Yeah.
They ask a lot of questions, and my idea of it is, especially since, I have the medical terms, my idea is always like, use the medical terms,
Yeah.
Penis and vaginas are medical terms. Don't go ahead and use ridiculous words, because then they'll be, ashamed of those terms, which are the right terms again, they're not like a bad word or anything. And I feel like my approach has always been that one, of being like, this is what happens, and then like you throw a little science in it, and they're happy.
You definitely become desensitized to this kind of thing.
Yes,
There's no embarrassment,
definitely.
or it's just like, yeah, this is a thing that happens.
Yeah, like when it comes to embarrassment and shame, I think both of you hit the nail on the head. Like, I think that's why I respect the way that Yennefer talks to Ciri about this, because there is no shame about it. And again, it does have a lot of snark. Yennefer does find the whole thing amusing, but she is generally respectful towards Ciri and also has no shame around the discussion. It's not something that's like hush hush. Things that should be important when you're discussing sexual relationships, things like consent, as you brought up. That's stuff that I would expect Yennefer to bring up to Ciri in a very matter-of-fact way, which I think is so important. We will definitely circle back around to conversations about virginity and sexual relationships throughout this chapter, as Ciri does. But at the end of this, Ciri gives Yennefer a nonsense answer just to kind of test Yennefer's boundaries. Yennefer starts to allude to, I think, the realities of her past, but she never tells Ciri the full story. Just like when Ciri had asked about war and Yennefer said not now. Ciri tries to poke Yennefer. She does. Yennefer is telling her all this stuff, and Ciri just shouts out something random. She's doing these paper tests, and Yennefer's like, what should go here? And Ciri's like, I don't know, 3. And Yennefer just immediately goes quiet, and she's like, no doubt you wanted to know what would happen if you did this. And Ciri's like, oh shit. Like, she knows that things just got real, and she embarrassingly, like, says, of course there should be this amount here. And Yennefer is just like, I get angry, just as easily as I laugh, which is very difficult for Yennefer. So she's not actually angry with Ciri, and then they just kind of continue. Although Yennefer does flare up a little bit, where Ciri's like, meh, and Yennefer's like, no. Again, like, Yennefer has that sincerity, and she's a little more level, I think, than she lets on, but she's also not afraid to be firm when she needs to be.
It was the, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed talk.
Yes.
After all the tests, Ciri gets tired, as if she was expecting this, then takes Ciri out for a couple of days just to run around and play outside. Ciri notes that all of Yennefer's exercises are always accompanied with theory. At the end of it, they're kind of like laying in the grass. Ciri's like, well, how do you know I'm magic? Like, did you figure out the tests? Like, am I? Yennefer's like, Ciri, since we've been laying down, we've been talking telepathically. I've known since you could detect the pulsations in my obsidian star. She's like, you definitely have potential. It's a very, like, gentle moment, like, again, with how combative they were just before all these tests through the end of them, and then we'll see the relationship grow from there.
Yeah, go Ciri. She can do that on basically what is like her first week.
Yeah. I do like that Yennefer is made to do all these tests, but she does see Ciri as like a very active, energetic child who needs to go outside and run around and do all this stuff, and she recognizes that need and she addresses it. And even the fact that they both run through the park, jump over ditches and fences, it's funny imagining Yennefer doing that alongside Ciri. It's not something you would kind of expect.
I like the idea that, Ciri mentions that Yennefer gave her sort of like scientific tips for breathing and things like that. And I like the idea that the witchers have trained her to do crazy stuff, but never thought that, she's not a witcher, so she breathes like a normal human and she's gonna get out of breath. And no one thought of like teaching her how to breathe and how to control her breath and like, what do you mean you'd have to take a break?
Yeah. And it's definitely like when we saw her with Lambert in the beginning of the book, he was just like, you're panting like a woolly mammoth. And she's like, meh. So she's clearly had like a lot of physical growth as well.
I love that. This direct quote from the books. You're panting like a woolly mammoth. Meh! That's my favorite quote.
That is admittedly something that I think about a lot when I exercise myself, just because I'm very prone to either asthma or panic attacks when I exercise or a lot of cardio. So when that's something that I keep in mind is just like Lambert being like, you're panting. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna fix it.
Okay, Uncle Lambert.
I know, I think about it a lot. After Yen has Ciri do these tests and after she's confirmed her magic abilities, Yennefer actually goes about training Ciri. There's this monologue, and it is, very long, and it takes place over the course of like a couple of sections, but it is one of my favorite monologues in the series, and it also gives a lot more insight into the way that magic works on the continent. Sapkowski writes very little about like the actual ins and outs of certain parts of the worlds of the continent. So we do get a bit from Yennefer here, so I do at least want to take the time to like read excerpts of it. As Yennefer is giving this training to Ciri, she says, "Magic is in some people's opinion the embodiment of chaos. It is a key capable of opening the forbidden door, the door behind which lurk nightmares, fear, and unimaginable horrors, behind which enemies hide in wait, destructive powers, the forces of pure evil capable of annihilating not only the one who opens the door, but with them the entire world. And since there is no lack of those who try to open the door, someone at some point is going to make a mistake, and then the destruction of the world will be forejudged and inevitable. Magic is therefore the revenge and weapon of chaos. The fact that, following the conjunction of the spheres, people have learned to use magic is the curse and undoing of the world, the undoing of mankind. And that is how it is, Ciri. Those who believe magic is chaos are not mistaken. Magic is in some people's opinion art, great elitist art, capable of creating beautiful and extraordinary things. Magic is a talent granted to only a chosen few. Others, deprived of talent, can only look at the results of the artist's work with admiration and envy, can admire the finished work while feeling that without these creations and without this talent, the world would be a poorer place. The fact that, following the conjunction of the spheres, some chosen few discovered talent in magic within themselves, the fact that they found art within themselves, is the blessing of beauty. And that's how it is. Those who believe that magic is art are also right. There are also those according to whom magic is a science. In order to master it, talent and innate ability alone are not enough. Years of keen study and arduous work are essential. Endurance and self-discipline are necessary. Magic acquired like this is knowledge, learning, the limits of which are constantly stretched by enlightened and vigorous minds, by experience, experiments, and practice. Magic acquired in such a way is progress. It is the plow, the loom, the windmill, the smelting furnace, the winch, and the pulley. It is progress, evolution, change. It is constant movement, upwards, toward improvement, towards the stars. The fact that following the conjunction of the spheres, we discovered magic will one day allow us to reach the stars." And she concludes this by saying, "Remember, magic is chaos, art, and science. It is a curse, blessing, and progress. It all depends on who uses magic, how they use it, and to what purpose. Magic is everywhere, all around us, easily accessible. It is enough to stretch out one's hand. See? I'm stretching out my hand." And so Yennefer, as they're going through this and as she's monologuing, they're looking for intersections of magic where she can feel magic from the ground, from sources of water, sources of earth, and sources of air, at least at this moment. And she also tells Ciri, "You have already felt the touch of that magic, the touch of the hand from behind that door. That touch filled you with fear. Such a touch fills everyone with fear. Because there is chaos and order, good and evil in all of us, but it is possible and necessary to control it. This has to be learned, and you will learn it, Ciri." And she goes on. Like, this is such an incredible section, and like it keeps
It's
going.
so iconic.
Yeah. But, until that, Yennefer is kind of, talking at length about the purpose of magic, how it serves in the world, and this kind of leads to Ciri having a prophetic vision. Do you guys have any thoughts on this, like, magic is monologue?
It's just so cool. Like, it's such an interesting way of exploring the magic system in the world in a very eloquently explained manner. It's very Yennefer. It's very much her style to give this really cool kind of like metaphorical big speech about it. But it is interesting thinking of magic in these three ways that, depending on who you are, it could be something that's really, really destructive. It could be something that's just very fancy and beautiful, and it could be something that is very academic, and it depends on who does that. It's not a surprise that so many people quote Yennefer on this, magic is chaos, art, and science. It is a curse, a blessing, and progress. Like, you see that so many times. Yeah. I think it's on her Gwent card.
Maybe. It's definitely on GoodMorhen. I know it's on GoodMorhen.
Yeah.
It's a very famous speech. Very famous speech. I mean, I'd be surprised if there isn't some type of version of it on the show. I'd be actually disappointed, but I'd be very surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a wonderful and nuanced description of what magic means to the inhabitants of the continent and to Yennefer specifically. She talks about chaos, and it does seem like they took the term chaos because throughout at least the English translation, they refer to magic as the Force, which, might be trademarked. So I could understand why they started using the word chaos instead of the Force when they refer to magic. Yennefer also talks about, the pull of chaos, and, she characterizes chaos into something that has it out for Ciri, basically, which lends itself beautifully to the rest of the scene that follows.
It could have been so easy to have a really boring, basic explanation of how magic works in kind of a very hard magic system way, where it's oh, in order to draw from magic, you have to do this, and this, and this, and this, and this. But he manages to make it a lot more interesting than that, and I do appreciate that.
I think it's actually Ciri that mentions that usually she finds classes boring, as in when they're given by Nenneke or Ayolev II, but when it's Yennefer, she's in.
It really does start here. They have to start from a clean slate, and the way in which Yennefer does that is she takes Ciri to one of these, points or intersections. She has Ciri touch this stone, and in order to acknowledge that, hey, chaos has been sending you these dreams. It's trying to scare you. It knows how powerful you are. We're going to get rid of these dreams. I'm going to give you the tools in which to do so. But in order to do that, we have to understand what they are. So Ciri touches a stone, and Yennefer commands her to speak. We get these prophecies from Ciri time to time. We've seen them continually throughout Blood of Elves. And there are some things that we might recognize here from the beginning of Blood of Elves when she prophesied with Triss that make a lot more sense now that we're at the end of the book. Ciri sees things like Yennefer's lips cut and crushed. She sees a horse, a leap, valley, abyss, stairs leading down. She hears Elvish saying something is coming to an end. What? Something about the child of the elder blood. She sees violet eyes, which can only be Yennefer's, in an emaciated, shriveled face, the coals of iron on wrists on ankles, stairs leading down. She hears about the time of end, the time of the wolf's blizzard, the lion cub must die for reasons of state, which is something that we had heard in chapter 5 with the Northern Kings. Geralt tells her they have to go down the stairs. There's no other way, only down. His lips aren't moving. He's also dead. There's smoke, fire. She's sent back to Cintra. She sees the Black Horse and the Black Knight. It's a very intense sequence, for sure. I'd imagine this is all just kind of really incomprehensible flashes in her head, some of which come from the past, some of which are from her own past, some could be from the future, but there's just no indication of what these things are. Especially as a reader, you're just as disoriented as Ciri is.
It's quite unnerving. Reading it yourself and the way that it jumps so quickly from thing to thing with seemingly no pattern. Obviously, once you've read the whole series and you kind of are beginning to understand a lot of what is being referenced here, when you're reading it for the first time, it is very unnerving because some of it you do recognize, the lion cub must die for reasons of state, but so much of it you're just what does this mean? What is this referring to? And the way it just flashes through it so quickly, it is quite intimidating in a way that it's oh my god, what does this all mean? And you're trying to make sense of it. So I can't imagine what it must have been like for her to see it all, because at least we're just reading it and we're just people who are reading a book. But this character, she is seeing all this flash through her mind non-stop. It must have been a really unpleasant experience. I think he manages to do that very well.
It's scary. That's what I'm going to say. It's sort of terrifying to think that, this kid has had those nightmares come to her sort of every night for 3 years at least. She's been having those terrible nightmares, and it's just must be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah.
Poor her, and thank God she's finally getting the help, if I might say like that, she's finally getting help for that. It sort of goes back to when Yennefer convinces her to do the training with her and sort of you don't want those nightmares anymore. And Ciri automatically is no, I do not. And you understand that now because those nightmares do seem pretty terrifying.
Yeah. I feel so sorry for her. The nightmares about Cintra are bad enough, but at the same time, you kind of understand that obviously, she was in what was a city being ransacked by an invading force. Obviously, that would leave you with nightmares. But then all these additional things coming into her nightmare that would be completely senseless and meaningless to her, and for the reader as well for the first time when you're reading through it. I feel so bad for her that she's seen all these frightening things in her dreams without even knowing what they mean. Poor Ciri. Poor girl.
And we don't get any answers. But Ciri does see an end to these dreams. Yennefer is able to kind of expel these dreams, and the close of that line is just, Ciri slept deeply with no dreams. That process didn't come without that fright.
God, this is also the bit where Ciri calls her mama.
Oh, yeah.
And, oh my god. Oh.
And it's like, you don't know if she's calling for Pavetta. You don't know if she's calling for Yennefer. It could be so instinctual. And the thing is, she hasn't had a maternal figure for years.
Mhm.
So who is she calling out to? It must be so instinctual and so deep for her to like have that reaction.
One thing that I also like about this whole thing to do with the dreams is like right at the beginning of the book when she has the nightmare of Cintra and the Black Knight and stuff, Geralt tells her like it'll be okay. When other people had told her that, she didn't believe them, but because Geralt is saying it, she trusts him and she believes it. But I think there's something nice here that Yennefer is saying, you will not dream about this anymore. I will give you the force to push those nightmares away. Geralt was being reassuring, but Yennefer is saying, no, I will make sure this does not happen again.
As we move forward, now that they've taken care of like that first hurdle, Ciri can go about actually training to become a magician. And so one of the first little vignettes that we get is Yennefer trying to teach Ciri hand signs, and Ciri is very frustrated. The process is painful. It's very uncomfortable. And while they're doing this, Ciri, again, who has been fixated on virginity and sexual relationships, is now just like, well, when's the best time to bed a man? Yennefer is just like, ugh. And she just gives, again, one of her very snide answers. Yennefer says it's a more or less thorough process. You first find the men who have beds. And Ciri's like, what do you have beds? And Yennefer's like, and then you get rid of everyone who has a sloppy bed. And then, yeah, so the whole thing is just like, it doesn't seem to answer Ciri's question.
It is good advice, though.
Yeah.
But as she's talking about beds, she at least also does talk about consent.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's in this section or another, but Ciri asks at some point, well, how old were you? Yennefer says she was 16. Ciri's just like, but what if I don't want to? Yen's like, well, don't.
Yeah.
If you don't want to, then you don't have to. So I feel like there is that kind of like practicality and that autonomy and that independence that Yennefer is trying to instill in her when it comes to her sexual relationships.
It should really be that simple, like if you don't want to do it, then don't, no one is forcing you to do anything. There's no right age for that, there's not a limit of like, oh my God, you're 14 and you haven't had sex, quick, you only have until your 15th birthday. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you want to do it, then if you don't, but like have all the info that you need ahead and then make your own decision. Go if you want to. But stop talking about it, Ciri.
It's very good advice and it's very concise advice, which is what I think she wanted. She did not want to speak about this.
There is something really interesting that I do want to pull out here. And it's something that I did not catch until I read this chapter again. While Yennefer is teaching Ciri all these little hand gestures, she notices that Ciri has an indent on her finger that looks like she was wearing a ring. And Yennefer's like, what did I tell you? No metal, no crystal, no stones. It's important. And Yennefer's just like, wear whatever you want. Like, weave wheat in your hair, but don't wear metal, crystals, or stones. Ciri's like, but you... And Yennefer's like, no. Like, admittedly, when you're reading through this, you just kind of glaze over that. And I know that I did every other time I've read it. And it seems rather unimportant. And I will, I guess, leave it at that for all of the non-spoiler folks.
I love little details like that.
Mhm.
There's a very, very subtle hint here. Like, it's so easy to, like, blink and miss it. And, like, I did miss it. So that's really cool. I appreciate the effort with the little details like that.
Yes, that was the interesting thing that I found. And if we get to a point where we're good to talk about it on the podcast openly, we will. If not, and you're cool with spoilers and you're on Patreon, you can head over to the bonus content on Patreon when it releases and hear what I told Sarah and Alycia. Well, at the end of that, Yennefer has had enough of all this talk about virginity and all of the weird little thoughts that the other novices are putting into Ciri's head. She's like, you're moving out of the novice dorms. You're just staying with me because this is ridiculous. So Ciri, as Yennefer asks, moves all of her things into Yennefer's quarters, which is cool because then they start doing training that can only be done at night, spells that can't be done during the day. Ciri spends a lot of time now reading, and it goes through a whole list of books that she's reading on history. She reads some romance novels. She reads about the sciences. She reads about all this other stuff, including, interestingly, a couple of ballads from Dandelion, who she doesn't know at this point. And also a beautiful small little book of poems by S.E. Davin called The Blue Pearl. For people who have read, the short stories and have read A Little Sacrifice, that's just like, no.
No, I'm gonna sue Andre for emotional damage. That was really rude.
It's like one of those things that like you're just not expecting, and it's like, she weeped over the ballads of Sin, and you're just like, I will too. Ciri at some point, tells Yen about her first meeting with Geralt in Brokilon. Ciri's like, yeah, he looked so dumb, like this. And she makes a face, and Yennefer Yennefer has a genuine laugh, which again just shows just how far their relationship has come.
Yeah, it's absolutely adorable. 3 pages before, she was like, I never laugh. It would have to be like a really good joke.
And apparently Geralt's face is a really good joke.
Again, it's like them bonding over the man that they care about. It's just so cute.
Yeah, and I think it really shows how, like, it started off with Geralt being such a point of contention, but now they're just so comfortable with it that they're able to laugh about his stupid face, It's a nice little change.
Yeah, Yennefer asks Ciri, like, how did you get past the Nilfgaardians? Ciri is very reluctant to tell her, but she eventually does, and then they start talking about her childhood in Cintra and in Skellige, time in Kaer Morhen, and it ends up being very warm. But it's interesting to see that, like, there's still so many unknown things about Ciri's history and about her experiences that, obviously, given the circumstances, she either can't remember or doesn't want to remember. And Yennefer only probes her so far at the moment. But it's definitely on Yennefer's mind, like, and on everybody's mind, truly, like, how did Ciri get past Nilfgaard? How did she really end up in Kaer Morhen? This really comes up in the next section. Yennefer is taking Ciri around, looking for magical intersections, as she had done in the beginning of the section. We learn that magic can be drawn from the elements. So Ciri started with water, but Yennefer tells her she doesn't have the strength to draw magic from the earth, and she doesn't have the knowledge to draw magic from the air. And Yennefer absolutely forbids her to draw magic from fire. She says under no circumstance, under zero circumstance, are you allowed to draw magic from fire. Once Yennefer gives that warning, they're just kind of like sitting and relaxing, and Yennefer again probes at Ciri's history. She asks, tell me about your parents. And Ciri's like, I can't remember. And Yennefer tells Ciri to look at her star. And Ciri is then brought to her past, I guess to a memory that she had either forgotten or chose to forget, or one that's very deep in her memories. She's brought to Skellige in the aftermath of her parents' death. She's with Calanthe as Calanthe, gets off a ship and she sees her uncle Crocon Crate. And Calanthe is furious. How could you let their ship leave? Every ship needs the permission of you to leave. How could you do this? Where is Iced? Croc says Iced is still out looking. And Calanthe is she's so angry. And she's like, you now owe me a blood oath. And if I don't collect it, then Ciri will collect it. Crack goes to slit his hand, and Calanthe's like, no dramatics. I don't need this. And after this small scene, Ciri just remembers the silent air in which all of the Skelligan and Cintran warriors just got drunk throughout the night, and whispers of the curse of the sea, how Pavetta and Dooney were just suddenly taken and killed by a tempest that should not have been there, that no one had foreseen. And it's just a very ominous thing to hear. And again, as a child, she doesn't really understand it. All of these things are happening around her, but it's still terrifying in its own right.
How old was Ciri when her parents died? I'm having a hard time sort of with a chronology of everything.
I think she was about 5 or 6 when Geralt first came to Cintra, because I think Calanthe says, it's been 6 years since you last came into my thing. Yeah. And then for the time for Pavetta to be pregnant, plus Ciri's age. But yeah, quite young.
Yeah, very young.
It's something that I thought was really interesting when Yennefer's like, oh, tell me about your parents, and Ciri saying that she can't remember. And then she says she's trying to remember Pavetta, and she says she was always sad. And clearly Ciri must have been pretty damn young, because she doesn't really remember anything about her papa, apparently, and all she remembers about her mum was that she had long hair and she was always sad. But the fact that she was pretty young when her parents died. And she was still able to pick up on such a specific detail that her mum was always sad. I think it's just a very interesting description that he decided to have Ciri remember that kind of calls into question, like, what was their family dynamic like?
Yeah.
If even wee child Ciri could sense that her mum was always sad. Like, it's kind of suspicious.
Kids are extremely perceptive when it comes to emotions. I mean, especially babies, if I'm really being honest. Like you said, Alyssa, before, like, kids are just sponges. Babies and infants are very like, if people start randomly crying around them, kids will cry without any understanding of what is happening. Maybe she just intuitively, like as a baby or as a young child, sort of felt this sadness from her mother and sort of like being hypnotized by Yennefer to get her memories. Like that's the feeling that comes out of her childhood, like her early childhood with her mum.
It is very interesting because, like you said, babies even, they're very good. And I think a lot of people don't realize that babies are incredibly perceptive to the emotions of the parent, especially if there's a strong attachment bond between the parents and the child. Because kind of from an evolutionary standpoint, they need to be in tune with the parents. If the parents are upset, then that means that clearly there is something wrong in the immediate environment, that needs to be fixed. And it's even if the baby doesn't understand that. But I did think it was very, very interesting, slightly suspicious.
Yeah.
That kind of way where you're speaking to a child and they're saying something like, Mummy and Daddy fight all the time or something. And you're like, oh, geez, So Ciri being like, she was always sad. You're like, oh, boy. Yikes, that doesn't sound great.
We get so little mentions of Pavetta and Denis that, the only tiny glimpse that we get is like either woman wants to have sex with porcupine man or woman is sad. That's basically all the info that we have about them.
Yeah, and again, because Ciri can only express so much, there's very little nuance to like, they were sad, but that's all she could remember, or that's all she could express and give voice to. Before we continue walking through Ciri's memories with Yen, we're going to hand it over to Larson Witcherflix for recent news on the Netflix show. When we come back, Sarah, Alycia, and I will continue our discussion of Blood of Elves, Chapter 7.
Hey, it's Lars from Witcherflix and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back everybody. This is the final episode before the podcast break and the Witcher world is still kind of calm at the moment. With Lucca Comics and Games Convention in Italy just around the corner, another Witcher trailer might only be a few days away. A Witcher panel will take place on October 29th at 3 p.m. local time. It will be attended by showrunner Lauren Hissrich, actors Joey Beatty, who plays Jaskier, and Kim Botnia, who plays Vesemir in Season 2, Lucinda Wright, the new costume designer, and Andrew Laws, the show's production designer. Let us keep our fingers crossed for an exciting event. In an interview with the Sci-Fi and Fantasy Collectors magazine, showrunner Lauren Hissrich as well as Henry Cavill and Freya Allen talked a little bit about Season 2 of The Witcher. Lauren talked about the differences between Season 1 and Season 2. She said, in Season 1, especially with all those short stories from Sapkowski's The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny, we embraced different tones. Going into Season 2, it had been my intention to keep doing it that way, let it go with the flow, but the stories are a bit more intense. We lean into those darker elements and I think they perfectly suit the stories. The only thing we really tried to be consistent about was keeping Geralt's sense of humor. Lauren also talked about adapting Blood of Elves, the first book in the Witcher main saga. For instance, Blood of Elves lacks monsters. There's just not very many, but we know from the games that people really like to see Geralt battling monsters. So we continued adding more monsters to Season 2. The goal is taking everything we can from the source material and then looking at where we need to bulk up the story to honor all these characters. Freya Allen gave a little glimpse at Ciri's and Geralt's relationship in Season 2. She said, when she sees him, it's just that sense of relief. Here, potentially, is her future. And I think there's an idea of, hopefully, I found my protector. Someone who could potentially guide her in being able to find herself in that world. When asked about the first episode of Season 1, which is based on the short story A Grain of Truth, Freya and Henry did not want to give too much away. This is what Freya said. Whatever happens in episode 1 triggers her main fear that everything around her falls apart, from people being harmed to people dying, and that fear is important for the rest of the season. Henry stayed even more vague. Without giving away too much, let's say Ciri has to face some of her own demons, while Geralt faces a monster or two. This definitely sounds exciting. While Season 2 will start on December 17th, we already know when the filming for Season 3 will start. According to Production Weekly, Netflix currently plans to start filming for a third season in the first quarter of 2022. Let us hope the filming will go a little bit smoother compared to the filming of Season 2, which was quite complicated for all film productions around the world due to the pandemic. To end this episode's Tidings from Toussaint, I definitely need to mention a yet unconfirmed piece of news about the Witcher prequel miniseries Blood Origin that would connect the spin-off to the main show. According to Redanian intelligence, our favorite bard Jaskier will make an appearance in Blood Origin as the story's narrator. This sounds quite intriguing and could be a very interesting way to tell the show's plot. The more Jaskier, the better. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. I hope you all stay safe and well. We talk again in the next season of Breakfast in Beauclair. I wish you all a wonderful time with Season 2 of The Witcher. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
It's been so much fun for me getting to know all of you, and hey, now you can too. Join the Hanza Discord at bit.ly/the Hanza Discord to get involved with our international community. You can meet members from all around the world, get involved in topics such as gardening, cooking, Dungeons & Dragons, Witcher books and video games, and more. Get to know the community before the inevitable watch parties of The Witcher Season 2, The Witcher Blood Origin, all of the spin-offs, and as we look ahead to Season 4 of Breakfast in Beauclair and a future Hanza meetup. See you there! Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. When we left off, we were walking through the moments that bonded Ciri and Yennefer as mother and daughter. Ciri and Yen keep going, they're looking for these intersections to pull magic. Yennefer has this kind of fun note that veins of magic are marked by dried trees, gnarled plants, places avoided by all animals except for cats. Cats like sleeping and resting on intersections, and she continues by saying no one knows why a cat absorbs the force and what it does with it, which is just very fun. It's a fun little detail.
It's just proof that cats are superior. I'm sorry, I don't make the rules.
Oh, cats and magic, always. It's very interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a fun little piece, I think, for Sapkowski to throw in there. Ciri is able to find an intersection from a distance. And at first, Yennefer's very skeptical. She's like, what do you mean? You can't do that. You can only do it by standing over it. Oh, really? Do you? And so they go to investigate it. Yennefer's like, oh, that's a very strong one. And Ciri's like, no, I can do it. I can do it. And she's like, Yennefer. And she gets a nosebleed. She finds that intersection distance. We know how strong her potential is. And she also has like a little thing. We were talking about Ciri's innocence on the previous episode. Ciri says like, Mother Nenneca says that we should draw from the earth sustainably. We shouldn't take too much. We should give back. Yennefer's like, oh, if only everyone else could hear you. If Vilgefortz and Francesca and Terra Nova could hear the wise words of the ugly little one in Lily's temple. People who think that they have the unreserved right to use magic. If only they could hear what you're saying. And Yennefer's like, but no, it's fine. You can draw a little. It's like picking a single cherry from a huge orchard. And Ciri tries and gets a nosebleed.
Poor Ciri. Papa, I'm a witcher. Ha! I could do it. And then she's like, oh no, Yennefer. Again, it's very, very sweet. It tugs on my heartstrings. Yennefer calling her daughter. It's just so sweet. Yeah, it's funny. It's just a little nosebleed, but I know that when you're a child and you get a nosebleed, it can feel very scary. So like, oh my god, I'm bleeding so much. Oh. And then it's just, when you're older, it's a bit more like, oh, it's fine. It's just a nosebleed. And then maybe when you're a parent, you're like, oh my god, my child is bleeding.
And that's definitely the way that Nenneca takes it. After that small nosebleed, Nenneca is not happy with Yennefer, and apparently the two of them don't talk for a week. Ciri kind of ends that just by giving Yennefer a hug, and then everything kind of goes back to normal.
So sweet. I love that Ciri knows Yennefer just as well as Yennefer knows Ciri. Like, yeah. Ciri knows exactly what she needs to do here. Just go up and just hug Yennefer. That's all she needs to do. And it's so funny that Neneka was so mad about it as well. Like, how dare you hurt my precious child? And them not talking for a week. It's so funny. Meanwhile, Ciri's just like, I'm having a great time. I'm just reading my book.
I know. As we keep going, we get like little flashbacks to what's happened, and they talk about training spellcasting and that a lot of these things were easy for Ciri because she was already fluent in the Elder speech. So a lot of the formula were very easy, and Ciri and Yen kind of reminisce about GoodMorhen, inadvertently also about Triss.
No!
The book says that Yennefer very coyly pulled all of this information out of Ciri about what happened with Triss at the keep. And Ciri was just like, magic was so calming.
Yikes.
Ciri should have felt much more nervous about telling Yennefer all these things, but by the end, she was very soothed.
Ciri's like, I'm going to snitch on this girl.
Yeah.
I don't care. Hey, Yennefer, guess what happened?
It's crazy. There's like this small little line, which is its own section. Ciri is kind of becoming, enthralled with magic and learning more about it. The book says, magic, like a spiked iron arrow lodged in her, wounded her deeply, hurt with a strange sort of pain oddly associated with bliss. It feels like a relationship with magic that is that kind of give and take relationship where, you're giving yourself to this supernatural element and at the same time it uses you as a conduit, as a tool. But yeah, it's just an interesting thing to note, like how much she's growing into the training that Yennefer is giving her.
She is getting closer and closer to the point in the previous section in the kind of the current time where she's like, I'm a wizard, and she's so proud of it. She's gone from, I fucking don't want to be a wizard, no one asked me, I don't want to do this, to now she's becoming much more natural to her.
That's just like, this is quite nice.
It's very calming. I really liked as well the bit where Yennefer is, they're speaking about GoodMorhen, and Yennefer, like her eyes grow warm, they lose their angry gleam and their cold and different wise depth, and Ciri kind of describes it as her being dreamy. And I really like that because so far, the way that we have been consistently presented with Yennefer as a character, dreamy is not a word I would assign to her, if you get me. Like, she's so no nonsense. She's down to earth. She's getting shit done. So I think that's something very nice that then when she's thinking of GoodMorhen, she becomes a dreamy. I don't know. I think it's just nice.
It gives us a little bit more information about the relationship that Ciri can deduce and the audience can deduce about all the good times that Yennefer and Geralt have had and how affectionately she thinks about the memory of him. There's 2 more of these flashbacks in this section. We learn a little bit more about Witcher's signs, which is pretty cool as an audience and how they work and the Witcher's place within magic on the continent. And then another scene in which Yennefer and Ciri keep talking. And this first scene, just to talk a little bit more about the magic of length, we had learned previously that Ciri can't do Witcher's signs, that she's incapable of doing them. That's one of the reasons why Ciri doesn't think she can be a magician. And Yennefer expands on that idea here by saying, the Sign of Art is a very simple spell belonging to the family of psychokinetic magic, which is based on thrusting energy in a required direction. The Witchers adapted this spell, making use of the fact it does not require knowledge of a magical formula, concentration and the gesture are enough. That's why it's called a sign. And she gives us a little bit of etymology about Ard specifically, by saying that I don't know where they got the name Ard, because in the Elder speech it means mountain, upper, or the highest, but if that is truly the case, then the name is misleading because it's hard to find an easier psychokinetic spell.
Pathetic.
And then she doubles down by saying, we obviously aren't going to waste time and energy on something as primitive as the Witcher's sign. And this next part builds upon a previous scene in which Yennefer was like, we're drawing magic from an element. We're going to expend what we're capable of drawing. So she says, let me remind you, control the flow of the force. You can only emit as much as you draw. If you release even a tiny bit more, you do so at the cost of your constitution. An effort like that could render you unconscious and in extreme circumstances could kill you. If, on the other hand, you release everything you draw, you forfeit all possibility of repeating it, and you will have to draw it again, and as you know, it's not easy to do, and it is painful. Yennefer says, and we'll have a moment to talk about this, but in the English translation it says, you mustn't slacken your concentration and allow that energy to tear itself away from you of its own accord. My mistress used to say that emitting the force must be like blowing a raspberry in a ballroom. Do it gently, sparingly, and with control, and in such a way that you don't let those around you know it was you. Understood? And so that's kind of the understanding that we get. That's as much hard magic as we're going to get, and it's not even really that. But an interesting note about this, if you are reading this section in English and the phrase blowing a raspberry in a ballroom so that nobody knows it was you doesn't make sense, That's because it doesn't.
This is just wrong.
Yeah, the term raspberry in English, if you're unfamiliar with just like this is a colloquial term, when you blow a raspberry, you're usually blowing air out of your mouth with your tongue out. So like that's what a raspberry means in English. Here though, Yennefer seems to be saying that her mistress, which we could probably assume at this point is probably Toussaint, is giving analogies based on farts. You should release power the same way that you would release gas in a public setting. And Cyprian kindly confirmed this as well. He says, yes, I can confirm it is about farting. In Polish, it says, I'm not going to say this sentence in Polish, but literally translated, the sentence that he said means, as if you'd let bumblebees fly in a ballroom. But this is just how you say to fart in Polish. So the truest translation would be, as if you'd fart in a ballroom. So thank you for that, Cyprian, for not only confirming the translation, but also for letting us know that in Polish, you say to let bumblebees fly. Because that is delightful.
The French version is just plain fart.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yeah, there's no like pretty bumblebee thing about it. It's just fart.
This is why I just don't understand that. Like, they didn't want to just flat out say it, I guess. So they wanted to kind of like dress it up a bit in the English translation, but it's just wrong.
Yeah.
I have never heard anyone say blowing a raspberry to mean farting. Like, when I read that for the first time, I was like, what the what? Like, why would you be making silly noises in a ballroom? I was so confused until I realized, oh wait, this is just like a really weird translation of just farting, because that just made no sense. I was very confused.
And also, like, do you really see Toussaint talking about farting? I don't.
I don't also. Again, I'm making the assumption that it is Toussaint because she just says my mistress. We know that's the relationship that they have. But at the same time, no, it's very difficult. It does color Toussaint a little bit more. But I imagine if she said it, it would be very severe.
Yes.
It would not be in a laughing matter.
No.
For the sole purpose of academia and analogy. Yeah.
Yeah, it should be like, if you girls have to fart, do it nicely.
Do not bring shame upon this house.
Do it respectfully. Always classy you will be.
Yennefer gives all this information to Ciri, and she has Ciri try this psychokinetic enchantment in order to send a basket flying. Ciri's like, I think I did it, and Yennefer's like, it barely twitched, do it again. Ciri does it again, and Yennefer's like, it jumped a little. She's like, be bold, be bigger. Ciri does as asked, and Yennefer tells her to try to fling the basket and knock the wall of a shed. Ciri instead destroys the shed.
What a drama queen.
I know. She sends this basket flying and the whole shed collapses. And it's like a lovely thing because like when you're reading it in the prose, you don't really know what's happened. Yennefer's just like, oh, shoot. Oh, it's okay. We can fix it. We could turn it into firewood. No need to panic. And you have to infer what has happened, which I think is very fun. It's a fun way of writing.
As well, when Ciri's like, oh, I'm sorry, I used a bit too much. And Yennefer's like, oh, don't worry, it's fine. She's being nice about it. And then her being like, hold on, ladies, calm down. Why is this uproar and commotion? Easy, Nenneke. Just the idea of like Nenneke and all these like priestesses just fucking sprinting over, like, what is happening? Why is the shed exploding?
My shed!
What are you doing to Ciri? You know?
I know. Everybody all around. It's a disaster. But Yennefer kind of takes it in stride, as you said. She's like, no, it's fine. It happens. And that's kind of where we end that little flashback. The very last flashback that we get is an outdoor conversation between Ciri and Yennefer. It's very fun listening to Peter Kenny's audiobook of this, just because his version of Ciri, aside from being Scottish, is so, like, persistent in this section, and Yennefer is just like, oh my god, what? Because Ciri is just asking her questions. Ciri's like, hey, Lady Yennefer, what about this? And Yennefer answers it like, she's just trying to bask in, like, the outdoors. And Ciri's like, but what about this? And Yennefer's like, I just told you, but what about that? And she just cannot sit in silence for 5 minutes. But yeah, so Ciri has all these questions. We find out that Yennefer tells Ciri that she became a sorceress when she was 13. And Ciri's like, oh, that's the age that I'm at now. It's a very quiet moment. Ciri says things like, I don't want to be ugly. I want to be pretty, really pretty like you. And Yennefer's like, well, fortunately, you don't need magic for it. You don't know how lucky you are. Ciri also notes, Lady Yennefer, what are you looking at? Yennefer is just like, I'm just taking in the tree. I'm glad that I can see it. And Ciri's like, I don't understand. And Yennefer just says, good. As we talked about earlier, there's all these things that have happened to Yennefer that she's still trying to shield Ciri from to an extent. We learned through Geralt's in The Last Wish that Yennefer had been a hunchback. We saw in season 1 of The Witcher the interpretation of how that was fixed and how painful it was. And we heard from Triss Marigold in early chapters of Blood of Elves that Yennefer had been blinded at the Battle of Sodden. It's a very reflective moment for Yennefer, despite this little preteen yapping off in the corner.
Kids do ask like the weirdest question and will not shut up about it. I mean, like, I work night shift and sometimes you go and see a kid and he's awake and he looks at you and he's like, "Do you think crocodiles get sad sometimes?" And I'm like, "Dude, it's 3 in the morning. Just go back to sleep." And that's just sort of how I imagine her, you know, just being like, "And what this?"
To be honest, like, I was very impressed that, like, Ciri was even sitting there, because we've seen so much throughout the chapter that she's constantly running around, she's wanting to jump and, like, exercise, and she's a bit of a wild child in that way. She's very energetic. So the fact that, you know, she's just sitting with Yennefer on the grass, and she's just sitting still, and they're just, you know, they're just in each other's company. It just shows how, you know, she's perfectly happy just doing that with Yennefer, just sitting with her, even for such an energetic child like herself. And I think it's nice. I like that. I like as well the very brief reference to Yennefer being blinded at Sodden. She doesn't explain it, she doesn't go into it at all, but just even the fact that, like, she's just staring at the tree, and it's just a tree, and the series is probably confused, like, why is she just looking at this tree? But obviously we know why. It's a neat little bit of storytelling of Yennefer just looking at this tree, just because she can, and that's something that for a while she was not able to do. I like that.
Yeah, it's very subtle. I have to admit, like, the first time I read it, I didn't get it. I was like, okay, she likes that tree, good for her. I reread it and I was like, oh.
She's just like, damn, I love this tree. This is a fucking amazing tree.
It is so pretty. Look how lush it is.
Because, I mean, I think we forget, like, we're acutely aware of how this war has affected Ciri. She's also not letting us forget it, neither does Sapkowski. We hear repeatedly how this war has affected her, but we rarely hear about how it affects the other characters and, like, how deeply this must have affected Yennefer. And the horrors that we heard from Sodden at the end of Sword of Destiny from Triss's first-hand accounts in the beginning of Blood of Elves. But Yennefer is so hardened that for her to be able to show silent gratitude for that healing process, for where she is now, shows that softness, I think, to her character that we rarely see. That brings us to the end of Ciri's flashbacks and her description of her and Yennefer's relationship from the time they met up until the scene in the bath. And I know that we're jumping from the previous episode to this one, but we are still here in the bath with Ciri. We kind of cut back to present, and Ciri's like, "No, I didn't like you." Ciri inside is just begging for Yennefer to ask. And Ciri's like, "Yennefer only has to ask, and I'll tell her everything. I need to tell her everything before tomorrow." Yennefer just quietly looks away, and she doesn't ask anything. But she must know. Like, she must know through telepathy, because Yennefer smiles to herself. The complicated and warm feelings that Ciri has toward her.
It's so nice. I do love that. Her having this really big inner monologue. In a minute, she's going to do this, and then no, she's going to be clever about it, and she's going to draw attention to my grammar and stuff like that. And then it's just, you know, Yennefer smiled. She did not ask anything. I really like that. I think it really shows their dynamic very well. Yennefer just knows. She doesn't need to ask. She knows. That's how strong their bond is. It is funny. Ciri kind of like reads her for filth a bit here. Like, I could pretend to be cold, unfeeling, and indifferent, ashamed of my feelings and emotions. It's like,
I
wow,
know, it's
really,
like, damn.
you're calling out Yennefer here. Yennefer's reading her mind like, rude.
Yeah, I mean, that does kind of take us to the end of this little section. And as we close the book, it talks about how after that evening in the bath, they receive the letters. Ciri and Yennefer finally leave the Temple of Melilli, and the only person to see them off in the morning is Nenneke. They're both wearing men's traveling clothes. Yennefer and Nenneke had a short conversation and then gripped each other's arms like men in a silent goodbye. And Ciri wants to do the same. She wants to be just like Yennefer, and Nenneke just won't allow it. She brings her in for a hug and blesses her and just says, like, be safe. And may the great Melilli watch over you, but remember the goddess has much on her mind, so take care as well. As Ciri and Yennefer get on their horses, Nenneke waves them away and she's just like, good luck. And Ciri just says, I'll be back.
My God.
Oh my God. It just ends with Ciri did not know how wrong she was. And it's just like, ah!
Da, da,
Oh,
da.
it's such an ominous way to end the book. Like, oh, you've had this whole chapter of like, oh, isn't it nice? Look at Ciri and Yennefer, and oh, look at how they started off kind of not liking each other, but oh, they really like each other now, and they're mother and daughter now. At the same time, you've had the constant messages to the ravens and the crows kind of being a sign of potential war or conflict or strife. And Ciri flat out calls it a bad omen. And you have everyone like talking about the war and like, oh, you know, is there going to be a war? And then you get to the end and we're back with all the crows and ravens flying overhead. And even Nenneke is like, maybe the bad times are going to come. You know, maybe it's, what is it, like the time of the axe and the wolf's blizzard and stuff like that. You know, Ciri's like, oh, well, I'll see you again. It's like, no, she won't. She will not be back.
Overall, this book doesn't have much in terms of plot. I mean, it has a lot in terms of like character development and things like that, but it's just overall very sweet book, you know, like
Yeah.
you have Ciri with her dad and her uncles like GoodMorhen, and it's very sweet and loving and heartwarming. You know, if you've read the rest of the book, and especially Time of Content that comes right after, it's all like problems and you're sad and and like it's so many things happening. But you know, sometimes I just go back and reread Blood of Elves and I'm like, everything is fine here, you know, like we're all happy.
It's so weird. This is actually where the series ends. This is the
Yes.
first and only book. Nothing happens. Like, I don't know what he's talking about there. It's all fine. Happiness and good vibes only. Thank you. It really is, like you said, there's a lot of sweet things, like with Geralt and Ciri and now Ciri and Yennefer. And then Andrzej just comes and like fucking sucker punches us in the face with that last line, like, oh, you better get ready. I was just going easy on you, bitch.
And I think that as someone who's new to the series, it's like, it's such an odd way, I think, to end the book, because it's just like, she could not have been more wrong. And it's like, about what? Like, what could possibly, like, I feel like when you typically get a cliffhanger in a book, you at least get some idea of what's going to happen or the danger that a person may be in. But it's like something, and you're just like, okay, but what? And it's like, I'm not going to tell you.
I think the vagueness of it just makes it even more ominous to me. He's so deliberately scarce on details. It's just like, she has no idea how wrong she is about this. And it's like, wait, well, what do you mean by that? And Andrea's, you know, teehee. Next book we find out. Uh-oh. Whoopsie daisy.
It's all like,
oh no.
It's like everything was good. Or was it?
But this is the thing, like, obviously, we all know what happens, but we can't even speak about it.
Nope.
All we can say is,
Buckle
oh,
up,
no.
motherfuckers.
Uh-oh.
That's basically it.
Good luck.
Whoopsie.
But I mean, as we're finally at the end of Blood of Elves, after many years of Breakfast of Beauclair and many months of going through Blood of Elves, do you guys have any thoughts on, you know, the close of the book and any advice, I guess, for people who are reading along and who will get to the rest of the series?
Get tissues.
Yeah. Get ready.
I mean, book 1 and 2, you know, being short stories are already sort of like different from the rest of the books. But this one, again, as I just said, this one, you know, is such a special book. Not much happens. And I know that people have already made that point about Baptism of Fire, where they were like, there's not much happening in plot, but there's so much in character development. So maybe if you read Blood of Elves and you're like, ooh, nothing's happening, I might just stop. Well, don't, because stuff is a-coming.
I definitely agree, because I think one thing that Andrzej is good at is he's good at building things up. He's patient. He takes his time. And I think that's good, because some people will try and be like, oh, there's not enough plot stuff happening, there's not enough going on. But you need the moments of quietness and solace and just calmness to explore the characters and see how they react. And even just having the little nice moments here and there, like Yennefer and Ciri sitting and just looking at this tree and just talking and their interactions. It's necessary, because if you don't have that, then all the things that are going to happen, they wouldn't be as impactful. And I think especially, well, I can't even say because it would be a spoiler. It's so frustrating.
It's frustrating.
Maybe if you read it the first time round, I could see why, if you were someone who really appreciates a very plot-heavy story, you might be a bit frustrated. But when you are reading it again, I feel like I have definitely, like, I enjoyed it perfectly fine the first time I read it. I really enjoyed The Blood of Elves. But reading it again, I had a much bigger appreciation for, oh god, I can see where all this is going. Oh god, and he's setting it all up. Oh,
Yeah.
oh no, I know how this is gonna end. You know, it's there for a reason. He's not pissing about because he doesn't know what to do. It's a deliberate setup. But yeah, and to echo what you said, have tissues. There's going to be some highs, there's going to be some lows. You might need a box of tissues.
I feel like the thing about The Witcher in general is that it definitely hits like those highest highs, like really incredible heroic moments, and it also just drags you down to the depths of despair and heartbreak and hopelessness. And it does those things so well, and it weaves so many stories together in order to do so, which I think is really incredible. There are a lot of characters, a lot of plot points, a lot of prophecies that we have seen throughout Blood of Elves that serve as a very solid foundation for the rest of the series. As you said, Sarah, there's so many things that Andrzej Sapkowski sets up here in Blood of Elves, as well as the short stories, but particularly in Blood of Elves, that are going to be crucial for character development and plot development as we move forward through the last 4 books. Alycia, do you have any final thoughts?
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Yes.
This was a blast, honestly. I had a lot of fun.
Well, I'm glad you did. So that is it for our show today, as well as for the end of Season 3, Breakfast in Beauclair. Alycia, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us for this episode, and thank you to our Hanza for listening. So where can people find you both, and is there anything that our community can help you with, or anything that you would like to share with them?
Well, if you want to follow me on Instagram, where I just basically post pictures of my figures because I am CDPR's sucker for buying all their merch. That's _Dolbothana. And if you would be interested in reading my story, if you have played the games and you've read the books and you're interested in that kind of thing, and you're interested in Yennefer being a more point of view character, my Archive of Our Own account, or AO3, is Dolbothana. I'm very original with my names. I just love Dolbothana a lot. And the series is called Promises to Keep. Now that I've said that, I'm going to go into a huge panic and be like, oh my god, I need to edit it. And yeah, to all the people who have reached out to me recently saying that they've been enjoying the chapters, I can't say enough how much I appreciate that, especially when I've been going through a difficult time with all my dissertation work and starting my 4th year of medicine. It means a lot to me to hear everyone being so nice, so thank you. And thank you, Alyssa, for having me on the show. My favourite chapter of the whole book.
Oh, of course.
I remember when the podcast was like only on like episode 3, like 2 years ago. I remember listening to it and being like, wow, this is so cool, hearing people talk about the books. I never would have imagined that one day you would be having to put up with me talking about how much I love Yennefer and Ciri on the podcast. So
complaining about mounds. Yeah.
Complaining about mounds. So thank you very much, Alyssa. Thank you for inviting me on and making this wonderful podcast.
I second that. I guess you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. It's Alycia Lamy, which is my name, ALYCIALAMY. Oh my god, that was hard. Or you can go find me on Reddit, which I mostly use for Witcher stuff, which is Aluschia, ALUSCHIA. That's it.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for joining me.
Thank you so much.
Alicia, thank you for your patience. We have pushed this off for about 2 years.
Yes.
So I'm so excited to have you finally on the show. And Sarah, thank you so much for jumping in with such enthusiasm and such vigor. And to listeners, to our Hanza, thank you so much for joining us as we close Season 3 of the podcast, covering Andrzej Sapkowski's Blood of Elves. And I will see you for Season 4 of Breakfast in Beauclair, premiering on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, as we discuss Netflix's Nightmare of the Wolf and The Witcher Season 2.
Yay!
Exciting.
I am done. I am done.
Yay!
Goodbye.
Yay! Congrats!
Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastinbeauclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the Tidings from Toussaint, news segment by Alyssa Winterflix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music from Filter Media. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Cover, the owner of the Trailer's Porpoise, Eric Scotland, Katie, the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B, Ava of Gullet, Behaving at the Edge of the World, Charlotte the Fingerbird, Glamour, Red Kate, the original Roach, Codringer's Cat, Libby, Clara, Deljet, and Dumandilovich, Bart from California, Wolf, Gory from the Yash, Shana Verblia, Sebastian von Novigrad, Tom from Australia, Jill, Kate the Tabby Witch, Oliver Holly from Sweden, James Carson III, and Kyle H2 Ho. Special thanks to Sarah and Alicia for joining us for this episode and our international Hanza for their support.